This is Progress Culture. Progress Culture is a weekly happening where master drummer Paul F. Murphy and I share live improvised music and impromptu conversations with people from various fields and expertises about community, value, art, science, freedom, and progress for all. We are excited to share it all with you, so have a listen and see what's going on this week on Progress Culture. Now, let's get into the show. But first, let's hear some music. Dominic Fragman and Paul Murphy here from Sonic Spirits with the guy who is building and owns TomBro Studios.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Nice to see you.
Nice.
It's a pleasure to be here. Obviously, the last episode we did, we were here and it had no walls. So we have walls now.
We've got walls. We've got new lights. We've got new outlets. You've got, I noticed, a little bit of drywall on your legs.
Yeah, it's coming.
We're in the last stage of the drywall, so there's some dust everywhere, and this is just part of the transition process.
It's exciting, We come from an airplane hangar into a nice space here in downtown historic Rockville.
Yes, it is. This is an old part for sure.
It's cool.
I'd say this is probably the first thing like this to take place in Rockville. Historic Rockville, I should say.
Hey, that's right. History being made in historic Rockville.
That's what history's for, isn't it?
That's right.
I don't know. That's a funny question. I often think about this. I think about how people examine history and analyze history so much, believing that in order to not repeat history, which in the ways that I guess they're afraid to repeat it, that they must know it so meticulously in and out.
But you would also have to know what wasn't written or how it was written, and it's not quite exactly how it happened.
Sure.
A lot of that's going on right now.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, it's funny. It's for people, I feel bad saying this, but for people who spend their whole lives devoted to studying history, and then 50 years later we find out that the textbooks were all totally wrong.
And it's
a very sad idea.
I have a degree in history, so
I think
I can. I wouldn't say I'm any authority or anything, but I certainly went through. It's funny. I was in Ocean City, Maryland, for the 4th of July with my family this weekend, and my brother said, "I used to come down here with duffel bags full of books," and he said, "And you would actually read them, and you'd have Post-it notes in all of them and everything."
All right.
So I read stuff, but. I got this one book when I was younger that I'd never actually read, but that lives on my bookshelf, called The Lies My Teacher Told Me. And it's not necessarily about teachers lying, but it's about this idea of the sort of corrections, modifications that happen in history, as we seem to find out more and more. Just like there's been a lot of discoveries recently about the evolution of man, and we're finding skulls and bones and these things where they're placing us closer and closer to a different species of hominids and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The general theories...
That's a big word, by the way.
What's that?
Hominids.
Well, we've had these ideas baked into, or that's probably not the right word, but that we keep in the telling of our histories that we often find out that are incorrect,
So are part of control.
Oh, so I was going to ask. So if not to learn from it, then what function do you think it plays? History, understanding it.
Well, I think that there is a function that it plays in understanding your relationship and the relationship of the way that things are working between different countries and nations and people and areas and regions and governments, etc. But we always have to remember that these things are easily manipulated, and I think that sometimes we think that the days of being able to break off the eyes and noses, smash the faces of these statues and burn the library at Alexandria, that was something that doesn't happen anymore. That we have sort of come to a point of intelligence where we can't be bamboozled or something.
Well, I mean, way back in the beginning of time, man basically thought that we were revolving around the sun. And then it was written and taught by religion that we were not, until a certain entity was on his boat in the middle of the ocean and could see the shadow of the eclipse of Earth moon. So it proved that the sun was shining from the middle. And then they had to change what they were talking about. However, he had a very hard time when he got back to Rome.
Wonder why.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Heresy. I think a lot of that a lot of that certainly happens, and I don't think it's any reason not to study anything. And I think that the mindset of what is currently known and sort of held up as the scientific method is something that occurs in the discovery of knowledge anyway, right? Like, we want to pursue the truth, and we get to certain points where we think we have the truth, and then we have to keep going. Or we do have as much of the truth as we've had, and now we need to discover more. So it's not that you wouldn't study these things. I think it all has to do... There was a couple episodes back that I named judiciousness. And to be very judicious. How do you be... We tend to be very judicious about what we are interested in. And we know that we have to take time to dig for better information or more truthful information within the topic that we're more familiar with. Do we take it for granted in that which we aren't as sort of boned up on, that that we need to dig more to find something that is a little bit more legit, especially with the way that influence can happen from companies and money and governments or whatever.
I was thinking about this the other day. I watched this documentary on black holes, and it was kind of like a split documentary. It was half the time they were following these scientists who were taking the first picture ever of a black hole, and half the time they were following Stephen Hawking and these brainiacs who were best friends with him. And the very smart people, they're all smart, but the people who were trying to do this, the theory behind black holes, were testing this thing called something to do with, it's called hair. They call it hair in black holes. And the part that it really screwed with me was, so Stephen Hawking just conceptually came up with a black hole. He was like, well, the laws of physics claim that this is real, and here's why it's real. And everybody accepted it. But he always had this huge problem that he could never get over. And ultimately he passed away before they answered the question, which was, everybody says that once something goes into a black hole, the information is completely lost, just goes away, and that's it. And to him, that was just like, he couldn't grasp that, and he's like, well, it has to go somewhere. And so ultimately they spend years proving that in some form or another, the information that goes in, whether it's matter or radio waves or anything, it does in fact come back out. It just comes back out in a different way. And I know this is a little bit crazy, or I'm all over the place with this, but I think what was most interesting to me was the people who were working with him and the people in some of these industries are so convinced with some of the science that they're talking about that questioning it is like dogma. Don't question it. Right. No, this is a scientific law. This is the way it is. And that's just because science. Mm-hmm. And so it's weird because, trust me, there are many reasons to pick on the world religions and some of the things that they've done to society and things like that. But I've noticed that science has almost become its own religion, where they mock or make fun of people who believe in spiritual things, who believe in sixth, seventh, eighth senses, fourth, fifth, sixth dimensions. Science laughs at that stuff. And I sit there and I'm like, why? You used to be the outcast. The scientist was the outcast. When you told people things were true, the religious people said, you're crazy. This is how it is. We don't tolerate you. Now the scientists are the ones who treat the religious people like they're the outcasts. Point I'm trying to make is that, back to your idea of history, why are people so set on things being concrete? Why do things have to be black and white? And where along the way did people decide, no, there's no area in between? And that's the thing that got me thinking when I was watching these black holes, because I said, wait a second, for 50 years, everybody said once it goes in, it never comes out. Everybody. And then all of a sudden they were like, oops, sorry, we changed our mind.
And that pattern, sort of similar to what Paul was saying, I mean, that is the pattern of developing or acquiring knowledge, right? Like there's a thing that is put forward, an idea that is thought to be the case, that is acceptable at the time. It's the most truth that you have found. But it doesn't stop there. It's always developing. It's the same thing. I mean, the principles of we've talked about this in much earlier episodes about, like I've had conversations with my friends that are physicists and stuff, and they say that the laws of thermodynamics show that not only are there infinite possibilities, but that as information is released, more possibilities are also possible. So if you apply this to learning and, in general, that means that the more you learn, the more there is to learn. So that you can never really have a black and white situation.
And who's been in a black hole? From here, from the planet.
To be capable of being an authority.
Yeah,
that's the other thing too, right? Like you're making a great point, which is like there's this. So they got the picture, right? So the two groups. One group proved that things don't get lost. The other group got the picture of the black hole. The crazy thing is, all these different laboratories around the world came together to take different pictures at the same time. So what they did was they used the entire Earth as one giant satellite, and they all pointed in the same direction. Another thing that bothered me was they all did it together, and then they took the picture and they all got together. They pulled in all the information and they said, here it is. And not all the academics could agree that the picture was real.
Authentic.
And I was like, what is going on here? Like,
well, how can you though?
I guess you can't.
I have this issue with a lot of the way that information is disseminated and the news and all these things. Who knows what the hell is real? Everything is completely editable. Everything is completely you have the ability to manufacture whatever image or video or audio you want. So how do you know what is even real? But in a case like this, okay, so everybody decides they're going to take a picture of a black hole. How can you tell if it's real? It's almost like I read this thing this morning that said that you can I can't remember what the exact quote was, but it was like, you can't count by counting and thinking, you have to count by touching. Like, so if you actually see this and touch it, then you know it's one thing. If you're only looking at digital renderings of things, how are you able to tell what's real and what's not? How are you able to discern much information about it? You are able to discern things about it, but how are you able to know that you're discerning actually what it is?
Isn't it a collective agreement?
Voice from beyond.
Voice from beyond. Isn't it a collective agreement? That's what it is. If you really want to think, like for religion, for example, or science, that you all agree, even if you don't say proof, maybe a photo, but since you all collectively agree that it's right, then the more people that agree to it thinks it's real.
But then if I accept, and I would say, couldn't we collectively agree on the most ridiculous things, though?
Exactly.
Now, then I would also ask, isn't that kind of what we're doing anyway? If we all collectively agreed on something that we all thought was completely ridiculous, do you think that it would come to fruition?
Yes.
Yeah.
So then what's that?
It's called Dogecoin. I knew I would work it in somehow.
There you go.
Yeah, man. That's exactly what is happening with the financial system right now.
Right.
Because we all collectively agreed that U.S. money was the world currency. That's what we did. We all just said, this is the dollar. This is the best that you're going to get. The pound used to be that because everybody used to agree that England was the most dominant. And then everybody said, nope, the United States is now the most powerful. We all agree that this has value. That's it.
Think that this is something similar to what we're doing with some of the parts of civilization that are causing displaced peoples, war, and the depletion of resources? That these methods of doing are just the infrastructure that's been built, and we all accept that it has to be that way in order for us to function properly? Is that just a collective agreement?
Yeah. So I have this friend. I don't know if he watches this or not, but he tweets really funny things, but no, I'm like the only person who probably notices, because he literally told me one time, I'm just on Twitter to get ideas out of my head, and he tweeted something the other day about why isn't there 2 car horns, one horn to be loud, a second horn to be like, hey, get off your cell phone, the light turned green.
Well, then I would say you'd need a third for what's up, man. Hey,
so to your
gonna sleep at that
point,
light?
his tweet was, how come someone doesn't invent this?
Yeah.
And I was like, in my head, I was like, well, why don't you do it? But to your point, I think a lot of us just accept things the way they are. And in his head, he's just like, I'm not making a car horn because I don't make car horns. Someone else is gonna do it.
Is that necessary?
Is what necessary?
Is it necessary for there to be people who think like, why don't we do this thing that hasn't been done? And then for a whole slew of other people to uphold the infrastructure of society as it is, so that everything functions smoothly. And is it even functioning smoothly? But you see,
like, do you need both types of people? Is that what you're saying? I tend to think yes, I do.
Why?
Well, because I mean, I don't know, man.
I was thinking about it on the way up here today. Like, what you said is like what we talked about earlier, sort of this, it can't be black and white, or everything is, the possibilities are constantly being released, and they're infinite, and so nothing is really certain. And until we crystallize it collectively, right? If nothing is certain and change is the only thing that is certain, how can we be, as a collective Earth habitants or universe people, be more like that? How do you adapt and thrive constantly? This is something that has come up with the COVID, that stuff where, we got to adapt, we got to do all these things. That's the way the universe functions. It's always changing. And how do we create a civilization that doesn't crystallize itself and just can ride that wave of change?
I think everyone has to start thinking more about each other, whether it's each other in a house, in a community, in a state, a nation, or a country. To move forward, we have to start putting some of these old ideas and the way things have to work. I think they need to be put behind us and start moving forward. And to your point about like the news, like the other night, my wife Jere was driving home from work, and there was nothing on the news about this tornado. She was going over the Frederick Douglass Bridge and saw these very black clouds. My son, who's a first responder, had to respond to the tornado in Arlington County, and then he had to respond in Washington, D.C. Now, 15 minutes after that, on the TV, you have all these alerts. Oh, there's a tornado possibility in Annapolis. So, I mean, a lot of this information that everyone is taking for solid gold is like, it's just being put out there and everyone is just following. Whereas that's great, but you need maybe some leaders with some new thoughts about where we're following, where we're trying to go, what the planet Earth is really about and can be used for, other than 5 people who own the biggest corporations in the world.
But I think you bring up a good point, Paul, which is like, if you see really dark rain clouds, 20 years ago, you're driving down the road and you see really dark rain clouds, and you're like, oh, that could be a tornado. I'm getting away from this. Now,
I didn't get an alert.
You're like, well, my Apple alert didn't tell me anything was wrong, so there's definitely not a tornado. Right. So maybe it's not even just the leaders. Maybe it's just all of us.
I know I've used this example before, and this is sort of specific to the weather, but it's the general concept I think you'll get, and that is like, okay, so now I get alerts on my phone all the time that there's a severe thunderstorm and there's a flood watch and there's this going on, and then nothing, not even a drop from the clouds. But one thing that I did read about a year or two ago was that there was a weatherman at a well-known station or whatever network that quit because he said they require us to have X number of red flag days every week or month. There's a quota. Really? And if there's nothing red flag to report, you got to make it up. And he said, I will not. He didn't want to do that. He quit his job because that was a real requirement from the network.
It's required to lie to the public.
Correct. So, not necessarily because they want to lie to them, but because they want probably mostly to stay in your attention. Mm-hmm. How do we keep ourselves in your attention? We just make some shit up about you need to pay attention to us.
Control.
Yeah. These are things I think that, though, like we have to be aware that this is going on, and not only aware, but like willing to say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to engage with that.
Yeah.
And this idea of like I can't remember how you just said it, but you said to take history and it's behind us. It's not like you forget it. You don't have to meticulously pore over it over and over again, whether or not it's if you're trying to figure out what happened 10 years ago somewhere or 10 million years ago somewhere. It's great to read about that stuff, and I like it, but look, in order to generate a new story, the new culture, the new whatever era of thinking and doing and practice, you don't have to constantly reference the history. The pattern from history does not dictate the pattern that you create, especially if we're saying that it's a collective agreement by the people to practice that way, and also that this research that's coming to light that says that we create, our thinking creates. Everything is just it is created by your will and your mind. It's no material matter or whatever. If any of this is true, then it's true that we need to initiate what we want the future to be like, not what we're told it should be like because it's chained to some way, something that happened before.
Well, I think back to like where we started with like history. I think maybe there's a little bit of an obsession with history, but more importantly, there's an obsession with knowing and being in control.
Right. It's not history. I'm not picking on history.
No. But that's a good example, right? Because we go, oh well, we know the history, or we know that black holes, everything disappears, or we know that there's going to be a tornado. all it is just people wanting to know exact what they're going to be faced with rather than being able to go with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think there's two reasons. One, it's easier to just say, oh, well, based on the past, I know what my future will be.
Mm-hmm.
That's easy. Two, I think it's fear-based, where if you don't know what to expect, that makes tons of people very uncomfortable. And when I say tons of people, mostly the people who have the money or have the power, they don't like that idea.
Well, I think but it's also not just them, right? Like,
Well, it's everybody.
It's a family. That's, I have my mortgage and my car note, and I need to put my kids through college and feed them and make sure everything. Like you want, or I think a tendency of us is to say that we need that in order to make those things function. But I don't know that we need them, but we certainly have been going that way. But doing things that way doesn't really seem to be working out all that well. No. Certainly it isn't working out for the majority of the world. Or
it's not working out in Afghanistan right now. And that's a pretty big place.
Yeah.
It's
not working out in a lot of big places. It's not working out in India. It's not working out in Brazil. It's not working out in, we can't even name all the places it's not working out.
Right.
There are essentially places that may as well be established cities that are just refugee camps.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And to have that, I don't know. I guess it's hard to talk about, but to have that going on and have somebody living in a much different situation that's a much more positive situation, I think that's difficult to me. I'm sure it's difficult to a lot of people, but God, I'd love to see do something about it. We've had this conversation on here many times,
but I think that's one of the reasons why, at least, I would say we play what we play, and why we use the poetry that we use. And yes, I have some knowledge of what came before me on the drum set or in music, and I love all of it, but I also want to play what I play and create what I am able to create sound-wise, musically. And that actually goes back to what you were talking about a while ago, where that, to me, the history, I studied the music history. Mm-hmm. However, when I play, it feels to me that it's coming from a spiritual side, something other than what's right here in front of us.
I agree. And I also believe that it is an example. This is I think the reason why I feel like these things are possible, as far as being able to create or have a situation that mirrors more the functionings of the universe, the ability to adapt and the ability to go with the flow and changes. That's how we play. We're improvising in the moment, and we are adapting to all the things that are occurring and creating a situation that facilitates that ability to do that with freedom, with creativity, with spirituality, with positivity, and the goal of progressing a certain type of discipline.
And I also spoke earlier about how that I thought maybe leadership may need to change. Mm-hmm. Well, our music is changing. And on my left, Tommy, you are one of the new young leaders. And that's true.
That is true. And if we're all here as examples of that within our own sort of
domain,
sphere, whatever, that at least can function as an example of how that can be.
Right.
Maybe it's not an example of, because, okay, it's in art or it's in this thing, and how do you implement that for everybody? That's not, I don't know. I don't know how you do that, but I know here's an example of it working, and so that it must be possible.
Yeah. Which is the best way to show people things anyway. Because
touch it, right?
Well,
that whole thing. It's not a picture. It's not a digital rendering.
You already said it, which is you can study history all you want, but it's always going to repeat itself. So obviously, telling people something doesn't work. So you got to show. You can study history all you want, but it always repeats itself.
Does it always repeat itself?
Well, okay. When people say, "Oh, let's study the history book so that we don't do this again,"
sure.
We always end up doing this again. So my point is, instead of telling people, showing them is obviously much more important.
Agreed.
Which is what you guys are talking about.
Yeah.
So that is it. That's the best way to go about it.
I think so.
I agree.
And I don't know what, with the trend of the way that technology is, and the way that it does sort of somehow provide the results that we want, this certainty or something,
sure.
Or at least it provides the feeling that it is doing that. I don't know how that shift will occur. I tend to think of it as is it a sort of throwback, but it does not have to be a throwback.
No.
Is it? Do we have to go back to some way of doing where we have discarded these things, but we're operating in a more primitive way? I don't think it has to be primitive at all. I don't know how to do it at all, except through music, but I believe that it is possible. So,
all right.
There's always hope, right?
Yeah,
Hope.
It's possible.
Yes.
I think that's what will at least catalyze the revolution. Revolution. All right, sorry. For those of you who are not watching this, everybody in the room is shaking their head at me, and I think that means it's time to go. So, if you're still listening, we appreciate you, and I want you to know that I and we very intentionally do not spend time telling you to like and subscribe and run all these kinds of things, to run ads and stuff. I believe that you are all smart enough to know how these platforms work. If you like what's going on, you will subscribe, or you'll just come back and check it out. Whatever, man. I hope that you enjoy it and you check it out. I don't want to pander to you. I'm sure nobody else does either, but you can check all this stuff out on progressculture.org, sonic-spirits.com. We are extremely grateful to Tommy for building TomBro Studios, as only one of the tiny things that he does as a tremendously amazing human. So thank you.
Yep. Yep.
And we hope that you continue to check us out. Things are obviously in transition, which means they're growing and progressing. So thank you all for watching us. I feel like my demeanor is quite different in this chair. I don't know.
It's a king chair.
It's Tommy's chair, so that makes sense. It will be under his butt at some point on one of these episodes. So thank you all again for being here. We appreciate you, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you all so much for being with us. We appreciate you sharing your time and consideration. Please feel free to reach out to Sonic Spirits and Progress Culture at sonic-spirits.com and progressculture.org. We'd love to hear from you if you're working on something awesome, or you have ideas for future shows, or you just like to say hello. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Much love, and see you soon.